That's impressive.
Nice. I like it.
Thank you so much, Sable. It is so exciting to be here as a part of Writers Conduit, and especially to participate in believable world building. And what I'm going to do, let's start off a little bit with our backgrounds and our introductions, and we'll take just a couple minutes so you know where we're coming from in building believable worlds. And I'll start with Kahuna the Elder.
Hey everybody, Kahuna the Elder, also known as Leo Soderman. So yes, I've just doxed myself.
I'm going to have to repeat my introduction, by the way. Apparently I was muted, but go for it, Kahuna. Yeah.
Oh, I heard you. Well, okay. Anyway, so I have been a writer in different forms for probably about 3 decades. I've done technical editing for magazines, a little bit of an editor-in-chief for a magazine. But I've had this story in my head for about 30 years. My biggest problem is that I always need to figure out what is consistent in my world. And part of this panel is to talk about how we make things consistent in our world, because you want your readers to believe in it. And that's what's important to me. So I stream every day. So if you ever have a chance, find me on Twitch at Kahuna the Elder. And, we have fun doing writing and all kinds of stuff and world building.
All right, Sable, and you?
Well, good time zone wherever you are. Welcome to day 2 of Writers Conduit. This is the Believable World Building panel. My name is Diane Morrison. I'm also known as Sable Aradia here on Twitch and around the internet. I am a writer and a world builder, and like these gentlemen, I am a member of the Anvilite Streamer Corps. I was told it was fine if I threw in my 2 cents, but I am the host of this panel, so that's about all I'll be doing. They'll be running the show, and we're going to take it away right now.
All right, thank you. And I am writer Greg, also known as Greg, and or Gregory Lemon, as those who are on my Twitch channel know that there are lemons everywhere, because yes, that is my real last name. Born and raised as a Lemonhead. So I am so happy to have everyone here. And I also stream Monday through Saturday at 7 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time for my morning marches, where we work on our creativity 10 minutes at a time. And it is a wonderful time to actually collaborate and talk together with the world building, with Kahuna, with Sable. And so let's start off with the first question. We're going to go through as many of these topics. We have topics planned for the hour, but at 50 minutes to the top of the hour, we will be taking questions. These questions will be placed into the chat, and we'll ask Sable to read those questions to us. But until then, we are going to cover some topics. And the first topic we're going to cover is, what is believable world building? And I'll throw that question over to Kahuna first. For you, what is believable world building?
Well, for me, it comes from a consistency in your world. There is a theory on world building that your readers are going to give you one big buy-in. They're going to suspend belief on one thing. And as long as you are consistent on that one thing, the rest of the world is going to be believable. They're going to understand it. They're going to fit. And it's because there's a system of rules or standards in your world. So as long as you are consistent with that, then the world becomes believable. If you say, hey, well, there's magic in this world. Okay, I accept that there's magic in this world. If you say, electricity actually comes from smoke in the wires. Okay, that's where it comes from. That needs to be what happens every time. So believable world building to me is when everything is self-consistent. It may not match real life stuff, but within that world, it is absolutely consistent.
Very true. And I love that concept of the big buy-in. You can believe in one thing. I have this wonderful meme that I can't bring up right now, but it was a picture of a Tyrannosaurus Rex storming over the battlefield. And the caption said, the photo of the last Tyrannosaurus Rex in World War I. And the comment was really interesting. He says, no, that Tyrannosaurus Rex is stomping on a Jeep, and those weren't mass produced until World War II. And it's just hilarious to think about, okay, you could buy that there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex stomping through Europe, but you can't buy that a Jeep was used in World War I. And that is really the hilarious thing about it, is that they could believe one thing, but I mean, but they couldn't believe the other. And so we will get into talking about rules next, but yeah. And not only will I'll go that one by thing, but cross genre hopping is very difficult within a book. You set your expectations, the rules, and then you follow them, and to subvert them has to be done with so much care. Sable, you got a comment on that?
I guess the main thing is, I agree with you. And I think one of the good ways to do that is, I like to say, physics work until they don't. Keep in mind the things that you're going to change and make everything else consistent with the reality we have agreed that we exist in right now until it rubs up against the thing you have changed. And then you have to consider what the consequences of those are. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so let's start talking about these rules of world building. Why rules? Why do we need to have rules in our world building and rules in our fiction? And even though we are world builders and a part of the Envolite Streamer Corps, we are writers. And our main product that we put out there is not the world building itself, but the written word, either in short story or novella. So why do we need to make rules? Kahuna, why do we need to make rules?
Well, the thing is, the rules are what give us a framework. So I think everybody's had this experience where you've watched a movie, you've read a book, and everything's going along fine. And then something happens in that world, and you just kind of go, what? And they don't adequately explain that. And we've all seen the plot holes. And I don't care, what series you've looked at, what you find, you go, that's a massive plot hole. Why haven't they fixed that? Because you recognize that in that world, as it's been presented to you, this is the way things go. And now they've broken that. And unless there's a pretty darn good reason to break it, all it does is create a plot hole for you to go, wait a second. And now you are taken out of that suspension of disbelief, because that's what we rely on when we write, is a suspension of disbelief. We need to say, okay, here's some things that I need you to buy into are reality in this world, regardless of whether they are. I need you to buy into it. But the moment you create a plot hole or you break that rule without a sufficient explanation, they go, wait. And now you pulled them out of the moment. You pulled them out of that scene. Mm-hmm. So we need the rules to be able to say, okay, does this fit along with everything else I've done to this point or will be doing? And it also gives us a roadmap for our story writing. If you know that this is going to break the rule and you don't have a darn good reason to break it, you might want to think about it again, right, or come up with a better reason why to break the rule.
And that's a great thing about that we have with writers is, unless you are publishing something serially, meaning putting out a chapter at a time or a small segment at a time, we can go back and we can change the rules. And for discovery writers, I've seen this a lot, where they will write themselves in a corner, and then the Deus ex machina, the God and machine, will come and fix the problem that was established because they needed to break the rules. Ugh.
All of the Lord of the Rings players.
Yes.
Send your hate mail to Sable.
I love Lord of the Rings, but Gandalf is a good example.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk about magic systems, and your fate because Gandalf is a soft magic system. Gandalf can do everything, but he starts as a wizard who plays with fireworks, and he ends as a appointer of kings who can do all of this crazy magic. And so I love Lord of the Rings too, but it is important that you establish it. And if you have a problem where you have this weird thing coming out of left field at the end, well, fix it in draft 2. Has anyone ever had the rule that a publisher has come to them and says, nope, first draft, that's it. You can't edit it.
Yeah, no.
Oh, come on. No, that's the thing. So I personally am a fan of harder magic systems because it's a rule. I follow the Sanderson laws of magic because I love to have a hard system. Now, Kahuna, well, I'm going to give an example, but think on this topic for a second. Do you have an example of a rule from one of your writing projects? So if you could think about that for a second. I personally love taking fairy tales because of how broken they are. Anyone who has read the original Grimm fairy tales or Andrew Lang's colored fairy tale books, you know how bad they are. They need to be adapted for the modern age. And I love taking those wibbly wobbly, timey wimey fairy tales and adding rules to them to make it consistent. Like one of the rules that I have in my tales is that the reason why animals talk in my fairy tales is because they were once a human who has been cursed and transformed into an animal. And see, that's my established rule, that you have to have been a human before you can become a talking animal. And because there's no consistency in the Grimm fairy tales on the rules, why can some animals talk and others can't? Disney example, Pluto versus Goofy. Why can Goofy talk and Pluto can't? And so I established that rule in my short stories on this is why you can have a specific animal talking and not talking. Kahuna, do you have an example from one of the rules that you have from your fiction?
Sure. Yeah. So in my world, magic is not given by the gods. It's actually innate to every being in the world, every one of them. Now, whether they have learned to use it is a different story. In the past in the world, it was a very technologically advanced world. And so they actually learned to use biofeedback and other things to train everyone to be able to manifest magic, a use of the energies within them. We had a cataclysm. This is thousands of years later. The technology is actually considered taboo. It's also pretty much wiped out from the cataclysm. But the ability to use magic is accepted as just, hey, you chose to learn it. That's great. So magic, when they see magic, okay, no big deal. But if they see something, anything at all that seems technologically based, especially something that looks like it might have been electronic or uses some other form, it's a taboo and it's feared or loathed. And so I have to make sure that when I write in that world, if they find something that looks like it was old and technological, now it's going to create a big issue in the world. And there are those who also trade in those artifacts because they're looking for the power of the ancients. Okay. They don't have a 9-volt battery, so they're kind of stuck.
Can I throw something in briefly here when Kahuna is done?
You bet.
I'm pretty much done.
Oh, no. I didn't want to, okay, but I tend to actually be a fan of softer magic systems, which can still work, right? There's a trend right now, because Brandon Sanderson is amazing, let's just be honest, and he's totally to credit for this, towards harder magic systems. Things that, okay, what do we mean by that? Harder magic systems there are very defined rules. It kind of works like technology or physics. It works the same way every time. Softer magic plays with that a little bit, but you can still make that consistent in your world building. And as long as you make it work the same way every time, A, right? And B, you make it so that your fuzzy edges have excuses, right? And they really are excuses. I have 2 major series that I work on. In one of them, basically your belief powers magic. So as long as you believe it, it works. So everybody's magic system works, which is cool for religious stuff since it's a post-apocalyptic Earth, right? The other series, magic is about manipulating probability, magic, time, and gravity, which is all one thing called the Erts, which is a fundamental metaphysical law of my universe. And the people who know how to manipulate that can A, fly magic ships, and B, can do things that manipulate reality. But the consistency is that it's sort of a quasi quantum physics kind of thing, right? So
Yeah.
if you have those and you make that clear to the reader, they'll buy anything, and that's great because that's what you want. You want your readers to believe your world.
Okay, so we've talked about rules, hard and soft, and thank you for that contribution. Now let's talk about breaking the rules. When should we break the rules? Okay, I see lots of noddings. Kahuna, let's start with you.
Well, breaking the rules is really important. Now that we've said you need to follow the rules, breaking them is important, but it needs to be an intentional break. And I kind of mentioned it earlier. It's like, if you break the rule, there better be a good reason for it. One thing that happens, if your reader goes and says, hey, well, that's not the way things work, you better be sure that everybody in your world does the same thing. Hey, that's not the way it's supposed to go. Your world should recognize that the rule has been broken. Then your reader follows with you and says, wow, it's weird to them too. So
otherwise known as lampshading. Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're basically saying, okay, the rule's been broken. You know it. The people in the world know it. The world is aware of that. Now, why did that rule get broken? And now you have a whole place to go with your story as to why did that rule get broken? It also gives you the conflicts you need to tell a good story. Is when the rule gets broken, everybody kind of goes, wait. Now there's a conflict to work with. So that's when it's really a good use of breaking the rule, because it takes you out of what is the norm.
Right. And I think that Sable has brought up a good point of lampshading. When you do something, do it with such great intention that everyone understands that this is weird. And proper foreshadowing. This is where it's important to be able to make sure that you have a good, strong outline with proper foreshadowing, or red herrings, as you may wish to have. But that's where we need to get to is preparation of the reader, so that when we break the rule, we break it with intention, and they go, oh, I'm surprised, yet that was inevitable. And so that's one thing that we really need to talk about. Well, time is flying away from us here. This is such a wonderful so the next topic let's talk about is World Builders disease. And the Amphilyte streamer community, we know about the tale of the elven shoes. Kahuna, will you tell us the tale of elven shoes?
Well, there are many versions of the tale of elven shoes. I will try to condense them to one. So basically the idea of elven shoes is this. You start writing about an elf in your world, and you describe how they dress. And hey, they've got these really cool shoes. And then you go into the detail on the shoes. Pretty soon you're telling us just how many stitches per inch are used to attach the sole to the rest of the shoe. Is this a detail we need? No, you just kind of went into it. And that's where we come into World Builder's disease. You are simply adding more detail than is really needed right now.
Yeah. And when I think about, you know, coming into the Anvilite community was such an eye-opener because it brings me into the world of the tabletop role-playing gamers and the wonderful world building that they do. But sometimes it's for the sake of world building as opposed to the production of fiction, the production of getting stories out there. And Sable, have you ever seen world building used as a tool for procrastination?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yes.
think we are all guilty of, you know what, I really don't feel like writing this chapter. It's got a lot of hard content. Ooh, let's talk about the calendar and the moon cycles and how it affects the tides, which affects the trade routes. Even though there's my character's not a trader, I need to know about the mercantile system here.
Oh, I will give you a personal, perfect example of world building disease.
Please do.
One of the first challenges I did on World Anvil was a timeline challenge. Create a wonderful timeline. I created a timeline of a royal family. 145 generations of connected family members
Yeah, I remember
with
this
portraits
timeline.
for every single one of them.
Yeah.
Portraits.
Made in Art
Portraits.
Breeder. All of
I
them.
have still in my folders, I have 145 royal family portraits, all done through Art Breeder so I can make them look like they were related to each other from one end to the other. 145.
It was a thing of beauty, but yeah.
Yeah,
Often
but the
choose.
thing is
Wow.
now my justification to myself, well, these all give me different places where I can jump stories off. And they do. There were a few of them in there. I went, oh, this guy is going to be the brat king. This is going to be the king who became, the boy who became king at 5 and is essentially, run by the rest of the kingdom. This is going to be the powerful queen who manipulates, foreign powers for the good of her country. So it gave me jumping off points for stories. But it was 145 generations. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of world building disease. And it was early on in using World Anvil. So I was like, oh, this is really cool. What I can do this, I can do it. And realized, I think maybe I've gone a little too far.
Oh, yeah. And where we have such a wonderful and awesome tool, such as World Anvil, for collecting and organizing all of our information, it is so easy to fall into that world builder's disease. And yeah, we'll leave my examples for another day. But how do we break out of it? How do we cure world builder's disease, or at least treat the symptoms? Sable, do you have an idea?
How can we treat the symptoms? Okay, bring yourself back to your story. What are you trying to accomplish with whatever it is that you're writing? What were you creating this for in the first place? Like Janet and Dimitri of World Anvil like to say, go back to your meta. And then think about, what do I need for that information? And something that I tend to do, because I have ideas about where the book series is going to go from the book that I'm working on at the time, right? Do I need this information right now? That's the other thing. It can wait. If it's not going to appear till book 3, don't talk about it till book 3. Work on the stuff that is going to be relevant to book 1, if that's what you're working on.
Yeah. And one way that I combat it is that I will give myself a couple of writing sprints. And I will just sit down. Okay, I will allow myself for the next 25 minutes just to type or dictate as much information as I can about that. It got it out of my brain. It's documented in place where I can find it again. And then I'm just going to say, that's enough. Let's get back to the story. Who is my hero, my heroine, my protagonist, and what do they need to do next? And me, I am the outliningest outliner who has ever outlined. And by having that point of view and saying, oh, I need to work on that section. And if I don't like that section, I'll jump ahead to the next act. I'll work on that, and I can bounce around so that I'm staying writing on something that's important.
And I'm exactly the opposite. I'm a pantser. I am the ultimate pantser. I do stuff on the fly constantly because I'll be writing something and go, oh, off I go. But the one thing that keeps me in line is to say, okay, how much of this detail do I need now? Which is a lesson I learned with that timeline. How much detail do I need? Do I need to really, do they need to know everything about this, or can I just mention it? And again, we talk a lot about Worldbuilding, but one advantage with Worldbuilding is I can sit there and say, okay, I'm going to reference this and I'm going to create a little stub over here and say, okay, at some point I may need that. So I'm just going to create it so I can get back to it, which reminds me it's there.
Yeah.
But if I don't need the detail, I'm not going to put the detail in. It's just not necessary. So that's really the key is this detail that I want to write about necessary to move the story forward?
Okay.
If it's not, for me, if it's not necessary to move the story forward, I will simply give myself a little hint to it and move on.
Right. And I'm surrounded by pantsers. I had no idea.
Plantser,
So
actually, not quite.
right? Okay, plantser.
I have landmarks that I have to hit that are the important elements of the story. How I get there, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm here over here, and I'm sorting sand particles to make sure they're all lining up. So, but I'll get into that in my presentation later today. Ding! Okay, so that's the important thing, and we need to make sure that we are sticking on it. But let's talk about some different approaches that we have. And as a reminder, if you do have questions, please feel free to put your questions in there. We'll get to them at 15 or 10 minutes to the top of the hour, and we'll be able to try to get through as many of those as we can. And if we have a lot, maybe we can even start the Q&A a little bit earlier, but please.
There will be a chat room on the Discord that we are linked to. I will look it up briefly before we sign off, just to make sure that, if anybody has any questions, you can get a hold of us in there. But yes, I forgot to say it at the beginning because this is my first panel this morning and my brain is still waking up. But there is a channel point reward. It's worth 1 point. It'll be the first thing you see. It says ask a question. Please use that. That way I can look it up and make sure I don't miss it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about some different approaches that we can take for world building. And we have the top down, bottom up, the story first versus the world first. And I'll take this a little bit of my approach first, and then I'll bring others into the conversation. I am very much a story first person. When I come to world building, I say, I want to tell a story about X. I have this fairy tale that I'm going to be adapting because the tyranny of the blank page is very real. Where do I start? I start with the writing prompt. Okay, from this writing prompt, where do I go? And so I then ask the questions, what do I need to be able to tell the story? Well, I need a setting. I need a character. I need this kind of a conflict. And from there, I begin building my outline. I begin placing the pieces of the puzzle. I may not know the picture of the puzzle, but I put those pieces in there. And I says, okay, for my 3-act structure, I need to have this in here. For my hero's journey, I need to have this in here. And that's what I work on. And so I have my story first, and then I build my world around that story. And then I do check to make sure that I haven't broken any of my rules, but then usually that's draft number 2. And so that's the approach that I take with my world building, because if I don't need it, I don't want to really think about it in an effort to try to prevent the elven shoes. Kahuna, how's your approach to world building?
So it's similar with less planning. I have an overarching story that I want to tell. And so there's this grand world story, and right now I'm telling a piece of that story over here. And so what happens is I say, okay, I've got to get from point A to point B. I don't know how I'm going to do it. But I'm also writing this first set of stories as a serial. So each chapter for me in a serial needs to have a beginning and an end that moves the story forward in that chapter. And hopefully something towards the end, the quote unquote serial cliffhanger, something that says, okay, what's going to get me to read the next chapter? I'm very much along the lines of, when they were writing Indiana Jones, what were those cliffhangers that you had, the serial movies? Because they were thinking of the old serials from the movie. And I think very visually. So in my sense, it's a very cinematic look. So I'm putting together scenes of stuff. So I have to have the big picture to know what that whole cinematic scope is going to be. And then my serial chapters are those sets of scenes within that story. I don't do any real planning from there. I just kind of go, okay, we got to here. I literally have to go back. When I start writing a new chapter, I have to go back to the previous chapter and go, where did I leave off? Oh, yeah, okay. Reread it. And then say, okay, where do I want to get to by the end of this next chapter? What's my next beat that I want to hit in the story to get there? But I don't plan it. So I guess for me, it's really almost bottom up because I'm building the world to support that next piece of story that I'm telling. So I have the story arc. So the story is kind of overarching everything, but the world is being built from the bottom up to support that story. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Now, Sable, I know Aaron Ree has a lot of experience with tabletop RPG. His show is also on your Twitch channel where you ask an old GM. And when he goes into his world building, does he also because his characters in the RPG world could go anywhere. So how does that point of view, how would that affect storytelling or writing it down?
If you're writing for an RPG, and there will be a panel on this later, so I'm sure we can get into that in more detail, but basically you have to make the world itself, and you can't make it story dependent. Your PCs might do anything, right? And you can't predict it because people are unpredictable. So you have to kind of loosely build in elements of, okay, maybe if they explore this, where will I go with that? If they explore that, where will I go with that? And if they check out the other thing. So I believe that he approaches it with a framework, and then he'll actually build out the house more if people show up at that particular house to check it out. Right.
Okay.
And I think that's probably the best way to handle an ongoing campaign. For myself, I'll briefly throw in, I do a total viewpoint character thing. The world builds as I see it through my character's eyes. I look at what I'm looking at, I try to tell the reader about it, and then I try to figure out how it actually works and make sure it's consistent in the edit.
Okay. And Kahuna, which one of those approaches that Diane Sable described matches more with yours?
I would say probably the second description, which is, I'm writing my story. Okay, now I have to figure out how the world works to fit that story. And once I've done that, we get back to the rules thing. Now that I've put those rules in place to support the story, I now have a foundation to continue the story with those rules. So it all, it kind of ties together, but it really is much more figure out what it is I want to say in this next beat, this next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And if I already have the world built for that, great. If not, what are the pieces I need to tell that piece?
This conversation is reminding me of a scene from Jim Carrey's The Truman Show, a great movie where Jim Carrey, as the titular Truman, he is driving along the street and the world is starting to break down around him. And it's very well planned because if he goes off the rails, he'll see the craft services behind the wall. There's all of these different things that he shouldn't see as the world gets breaking down, as he starts becoming more erratic and less predictable. And for my own world building and for my storytelling is very much like the Truman Show, is because if my characters start deviating from the pre-approved plan, from my thou shalt not touch outline, then I start getting into trouble, because then you're going to see the man behind the curtains. You're going to see the Christoph up in the moon. And so that is one of those challenges.
Can I interrupt for a moment with a comment that
you bet.
Yeah, because this is a different insight point. Meladaman said, okay, but the idea about not world building anything else other than what you need for the story. The amount of story ideas I've gotten from world building things I don't strictly need makes me against the idea. And while I do see that you probably shouldn't world build too much outside what you need, it can also spark ideas you wouldn't have had otherwise. I said in the comments that's valid. It worked for Tolkien. Mm-hmm. It worked for Olaf Stapledon and many others. It's more time consuming, but it's valid. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the key of using those extra details as places where you can jump off later to other things. The key is, if you're never going to use that detail ever again, that's probably not a detail you need. But if you go, hey, I'm going to build this little thing over here because I've got this thing bugging me in the back of the head about this, write it. So you got it for later. But otherwise, if it's something where it's like, no, I just want to add how fuzzy the elven shoes are right here. Yeah, that's probably a detail you don't need.
Right. And I think that brings up a great point of there is a fine line between excessive world building and writing a white walled room where you see nothing around, you only see the character. It's almost like dialogue from a screenplay. You know, we do need to make sure that we have a rich world, a lived in world, something that the readers can really sink their teeth in. But I think that is the fine line that we need to. And some authors tread on one side and some authors tread on the other. I definitely need to move more towards a richer world. So it's not this blank void that my characters are living in, but it's a more rich world. So yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. So any more things that we want to talk about on the world building approaches?
I think we covered really good grounding. This is the kind of conversation that I know for next year we need to make at least 2 hours, because I know we could go on for a lot longer.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And definitely getting into practical advice and stuff like that. But I think our next topic, I think will really help us out, because when we talk about the critical components of world building, if there is someone who has the blank page, someone who has a blank world to build, they want to start building, where do we start? And I'll whoever wants to take it. What is the first thing that we need to work on or think about when we start building a world?
That's an interesting question. Because for me, I don't know that I find anything quote unquote critical.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's really starting to build a scaffold. Okay, I guess if we want to say critical, it's what's the story? Am I telling a sci-fi story? Am I telling a fantasy story? Am I telling a historical story? And what is the scaffolding of the story? And that to me shapes the world. For example, in the world I'm working on now, I knew what the basic storyline was going to be. We went from a technological society that was running out of resources, and because of experimentation with how to create new energy, they created a cataclysm that took them back to, a medieval structure. So there's that storyline. I've got that storyline. How did that happen? All that stuff is the framework for my story. And now I say, okay, that's a really big story. I can't tell that, but I can tell this little piece over here. Okay. So I had to have that framework of the story. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, if I'm going to talk about the world being nearly destroyed, I better have a map of how it nearly got destroyed. Yeah. And okay, well, I can't talk about the entire map at one time. I've got this little country over here on the map. I've got a city over here, and I've got some people in the city. So I've just kind of funneled down this framework to where now, okay, I can start telling the story of one person and then moving from there. So to me, what's critical is to have if not a plan, because I really don't plan it, but a framework to say, okay, well, this makes sense. This piece makes sense of that. This piece makes sense of that. This piece makes sense of that. And then build up from there.
Okay. Because I was thinking along the same line is the thing that I think you really need to have to start out is what kind of conflict are you going to have within your world? The way that you were describing it, Kahuna, is the conflict of the technology versus the magic and the transition and the conflict there. And there's the different types of stories. You have man versus God, man versus technology, man versus self, or all of these different types of conflict that are in there. And once you have a really good understanding of the type of conflict that you have, then you can start saying, okay, what kind of a world, global, country, city, what kind of a world would best bring that kind of a conflict out? And then I get into characters. What kind of characters are most affected by that conflict? And then you have your hero. There you have your villain. Whether the villain be personified or sociological, that's your choice of your story. But if you don't have conflict, you don't have the gasoline or the fuel that will move your story forward. Conflict. So I like to think of what's my conflict, and then I build the engine to then that will consume the fuel, and that's where we start getting into stuff like that. Sable, do you have a comment on that?
I don't think I can add anything that you guys haven't already said.
Okay.
I would say the one thing, Greg, I think where I differ with you is you come up from the conflict. I come from creating the character. I create some characters I like, and then figure out what their conflict is, what's going to conflict with them. So it's like I create the characters, which usually I try to create characters that alone are going to conflict with each other because their personalities are so different. And then say, okay, now what is it that's going to bother them? What is it that's going to affect these characters? And how do each of them react to that conflict? Because they all will react differently until such a time they become of one mind to address a bigger conflict together. So I start from the character point of view as opposed to the conflict point of view.
I guess to say that another way is, if you and I'm not suggesting any animal cruelty in this example, so please, but if you took two cats, put them in a box, and shook the box really hard, you would have your conflict. What I'm hearing is that you like to describe the cats and the characters first. I'm describing the box and the act of shaking the box regardless. So I think we're both getting there from the same we're both eventually getting to the same point. But whether you build the box or you find the cats, I think that is definitely personal preference.
Yep.
We're at 10 minutes to the hour. Can we skip the section on tropes and save that for another time so we can do questions?
Yes, let's hop over to the questions.
That is awesome. Okay, so I have I got to go over here to see them because it's on my other monitor here, but
Sable's headquarters.
I actually have like a command center around here right now. It's kind of stunning. It looks like NASA, but okay.
And while Sable's looking for that, huge shout outs to the staff, the organizers, and all the people working behind the scenes that have made this Writer's Conduit possible. Thank you.
Oh,
okay, Sable, let's get into the question.
Awesome. Okay, and Stretch put some of them up for me too. All right, so our first questions were from Barbarossa. They're both lengthy. I'm going to do one. I'll come back to the second one if we have time. First one is I have a question on magic, and that's for all of us. When utilizing a hard magic system, how do you make sure you don't break your immersion when writing it?
I would introduce the magic slowly over time as the character needs to learn it. There is often there's often in stories the character who doesn't know anything. They are the stand-in for the audience. Thinking of the Harry Potter world, Harry knows nothing. Ron knows everything social, Hermione knows everything intellectual. And you get into the social world building from Ron explaining it to Harry. You get all of the magic from Hermione explaining it to Harry. And so that is slow. You have to have those rules, but you don't info dump. It just will come as you work along it. So that's my answer.
I think for me, it comes back to those rules, but one of those rules is your characters and the people in your world have to believe it before your reader will. So if your characters in your world act like, yeah, this is the way it works, your reader will buy into, all right, that's the way it works. So as long as you don't break that continuity with the characters in your world, with the people in your world or the denizens of your world, then you should be able to stay in the immersion. It's when you break that, and I think Greg's right. Bring it in, not as we're going to tell you how this works. Bring it in as, oh yeah, well that worked like this. Mm-hmm. It's a discussion. It's just, oh, how did that work? Like this? Oh, okay. That's how your denizens treat it. So your reader will treat it similarly.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Next question.
Yeah. I was going to say, show, don't tell, right?
Show, don't tell.
Build it into the character's experience, which is why often people start with a character like Harry Potter, who doesn't understand what's going on and needs to be taught. Then you can teach your reader by teaching them. Okay, Officer Genius asks, so with pantsing, how do you do a larger story, in particular with stories with a lot of backstabbing or conspiracies?
I'm not touching this one.
No, that's for us, Kahuna.
All right. So you've got a story with a lot of backstabbing conspiracies. You can still pants it. Again, when I said earlier, I said you have to have a framework. So you have to know where the story's going, but you don't have to have the finite details. So if you know, for example, well, I want to have this backstabbing here. Okay, great. You have to tell a story that leads up to that. And that story can be as convoluted or straightforward as you want it to be. And you have to know why you are having that backstabbing and what the outcome, because if you're planning on having backstabbing and, all this kind of stuff going on, you already know, you have already planned your outcome. You already know what you wanted to have happen out of that. So you can't really pants that because you already planned it. So you're being more of a planter. You just didn't know you planned it. But if you are looking to put that stuff in, you already know what's going to happen. So now what you can pants is how you get to it and what happens after it to the next plot point. So it actually gets fairly easy as long as you know, okay, well, this is why it's happening. This is what I'm going to do about it.
I think that actually Author Goddess has some great thoughts about this. She does this great workshop about everybody outlines. Even if you're a pantser, you outline. Some people do it by creating a skeleton. Those are the plotters. And some people do it by creating an exoskeleton. Those are the pantsers. You go through and you make it make sense afterwards, right? That's how you handle that. You go, okay, well, I know, like Kahuna said, X, Y, and Z have to happen. You write those, and then you make it make sense in the edit. And people think you planned it that way all along and that you're a genius, but Okay.
And half the time you wrote something and go, oh crap, that doesn't make sense. I know it'll make it make sense. You come back over here and fix it. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah.
That's what the third and fourth draft are for.
Yes. Or the 10th. Anyway,
yeah. I was being optimistic.
The Happy Book Writer asks, so what's a good way to put religion into the world? That's a big question, but let's try to do it briefly.
So what is religion? That's really what you were trying to answer. What is religion? It's a belief system. It's an organization in some cases. You need to decide what that religion is going to be and how it affects your world and what that religion is going to mean in your world. So is the religion a means of controlling? Is the religion a means of education? Is the religion a means of explaining things that don't have explanation? What is the purpose of the religion in your world? And now that gives you that, like Sable called it, an exoskeleton. This is the grand purpose of the religion. Now let me fill the details of how the religion fulfills that purpose in the world.
And I would add to that is how big of a role will religion play into the story that you are telling? Because if you're doing like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, religion will play very heavily into that story. But if you are doing a story like the Jungle Book, then religion really isn't that important because it's not driving the conflict. So how understanding that everybody has religion or the absence of religion, I think is critical. Everyone, and that's what you'll need to get into when you're talking about character building. What's their background and how does it impact that person? So you're not, I would presume you're not writing a treatise on theological discussion and calling it a fiction book, but it's important that realizing it's a part of it is one part.
Lewis.
What C.S. Lewis?
A treatise on religion and calling it a fiction book. I love it, but
Yeah, it's a great book, but it just depends on what your objectives are.
Yeah.
It depends. Okay, maybe two more questions.
yes. All right. So what if you're planning for a graphic novel? If you're working in a visual medium, does that change how you interact with the visuals of world building? And this is from Gideon Nav fan.
I don't think it really changes. Well, now I can speak for me. For me, it doesn't change because I see my stories visually. So for me, a graphic novel is to me, I think in storyboards. So my story is storyboarded out. If I had the ability to be that good of an artist that I could draw it out actually on storyboards rather than stick figures, then I would draw it out because that's how I see it. So for me, graphic novel, if that's how you see your story, I don't see any real difference in how the story is built because that's not how I do it. I mean, I literally storyboard it in my head. So it's a graphic novel anyway.
I think for myself, for a graphic novel, you can get less details in the text, right? The details must be in the art, right? So you do have to change your focus. If you're not used to thinking of it visually like Kahuna, you do have to think of it that way. And then you have to think about the complexity of how that can be revealed within, what your artist or you as the artist are working with, right? So you can't do a bunch of long dialogue in graphic novels. That's not going to work. You could do exposition in frames with but yeah. So it changes more the approach than what you're doing per se. Yeah.
I would only add that you would probably want to take a screenwriter approach to your fiction as opposed to a novelist, because I think that the graphic novel is closer to a movie just with slides as opposed to a motion picture. But I think screenwriting would be a better approach to that.
All right, last question really quickly. What are some good ways of balancing genre from Dragon Magpie? And I assume by balancing genre, I think that I'm taking that to mean the needs of your genre, or if you're doing like mashups.
I try to focus on one genre at a time, and so I don't know if I'm really the qualified to answer this question, but I think it does go back to establish your rules. And maybe let me put it this way. There's no such thing as genre mashing. It's just your genre. Whatever, I mean, you may think it may be steampunk, you may think it be fantasy, but it's your genre. So if you establish your genre, your extremely tight niche, then just write your rules, know how to follow them, and know when to break them.
Yeah, I think Greg's right. There's really not a mashup. I mean, it's a matter of what fits your story. What story are you trying to tell? If it has elements of fantasy, if it has elements of sci-fi or elements of historical fiction, okay, it has those elements, but it's not really a mashup. It's just how you've decided your story will be told.
Yeah, I say consider the genres you are working with, that you are trying to put together, and consider their tropes. Does your story fit more towards one or the other? If it fits more towards one, lean that way.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today, kids. So we're going to need to wrap everything up. I want to give everyone 30 seconds to plug their website, their Twitch channel, and then say goodbye. So we'll start off with Kahuna the Elder.
It's really simple. Look for Kahuna the Elder. That's on Twitch. That's on Facebook. That's on World Anvil. That's in my Discord. That's in my website. That's the only one you won't find that it is YouTube. My YouTube channel is yt.kahunatheelder.com because I'm not big enough to have one of those fancy name ones. But if you go to yt.kahunatheelder.com, that'll take you to my YouTube channel. And you'll find me 8 a.m. Pacific time, Monday through Friday. You can come on in for my daily stream, and we have a good time, and we chat about pretty much everything but a lot of world building.
All right, Sable.
I'm Diane Morrison, or Sable Aradia. You can find me here. We do writing streams Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, and sometimes Saturdays. Ask an Old GM was already mentioned by Greg. I can also be found at DianeMorrisonFiction.com, or type in Sable Aradia World Anvil, and you will find my profiles of my world building there.
All right. And to find me, I am Writer Greg at twitch.tv/WriterGreg, WriterGreg.com, or pretty much Writer Greg on most of your social platforms. And thank you so much. And please make sure that you follow Kahuna the Elder on twitch.tv, Sable Aradia on twitch.tv, and myself as Writer Greg. Give us a follow so that you can join us for our future streams. And my morning marches, Kahuna's world building, Sable's wonderful adventures. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And please make sure that you go back to writersconduit.com to find the schedule for upcoming streams. And each of us, you can find our profiles on Writers Conduit. Click our respective names, and you will see the future panels that we will be part of and leading and participating in. And until then, have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.